Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Thank you. If those people who are still in the aisles would please take their seats, we have plenty more over here, and I believe there are also a few people out in the lobby, so come on in and take your seats. My name is Marianne Veneres. I am the Executive Director of the Center for International Trade and Transportation, and I'm also Deputy Director of the MedTrans Transportation Center. And it's a true pleasure to see you all here and so many friends. I know today was a very busy day because this morning we had the Pulse of the Port, and then Paul Bingham spoke at the Propeller Club. Tonight, this event, there's still something going on. It's like graduate school. We're running from one class to the other, aren't we? We're going to be very smart today. I'd like to welcome you, as I said, to Cal State Long Beach and to our second Point Counterpoint event. And the purpose of our Point Counterpoint event is to explore in a natural setting opposing and different perspectives on an important trade-related issue. And we encourage a dialogue that is non-competitive, that's informative, and that's educational. Now, our goal is not to come up with a winner or a loser, as it is the tradition with the regular point counterpoints. Rather, the goal is for you, the audience, to win by being better informed. So keep in mind tonight that our point, when you think about our point counterpoint question, which is, are we ready or are we not ready to accommodate the projected growth in containerized freight? So I would be very much interested in your thoughts after you listen to the discussion and saw the video today. Now, before we begin our tonight's program, I do have to make a few announcements, and I would like to welcome a few special people here. First of all, in your program, I believe it's page 7, you will find the names of the CITT Policy and Steering Committee. I would like the members of the CITT Policy and Steering Committee to stand up and be recognized for their contribution for tonight's event and their contribution at our monthly meetings. Please stand up and be recognized. And being at the university, we have our students here. Actually, we make them to come. I would like the graduates of the Global Logistics Specialists, the Masters of Global Logistics, the Marine Terminal Operations Professional, and all the students, even those who came, it's Easter break today here this week, you know, all the students from CSULB and USC to please stand up. Stand up. That's true. These are our students, and this is your future workforce, isn't that? Talking of future workforce, I do have to say hello to about 30 Caltrans planners that are here with us tonight. This is a group of students that is here with us for a seminar that is presented or held, put together actually by Dr. Tom O'Brien. So thank you for coming. I know you had a long day of teaching at APM terminals today, and I'm very pleased that you could come tonight and be with us. And next, I have to say a very special welcome to our friends from San Diego. Once again, we have a bus filled with industry leaders. I understand 50 of you came tonight, and this group has been organized by the San Diego World Trade Center Association under the leadership of the dynamic Bella Hoyles. So wave and show us where you are. Thank you for coming. I know you're going to have a long trip back, but I understand it was a worthwhile trip, and it's even going to be better, right? And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to present to you the chairman of the CITT Policy and Steering Committee, Associate Vice President, International Education, and Dean of College of Continuing Professional Education. This is all one person. And my boss, Dr. CITT Joshi.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to California State University, Long Beach. President F. King Alexander is away, but he has asked me to extend his warm welcome to all of you. He is fully aware of the importance of this event. As you are on campus today, I would like to take a few moments to talk about Cal State Long Beach and how we're doing. Well, maybe not very good with the financial situation that we're in. As you all know, California State University Long Beach is a flagship institution, not only in this region, but in the nation as a whole. We are known nationally and internationally for our outstanding academic programs. Despite recent increases in tuition and fees, CSULB remains one of the most affordable institutions in the country. But as you know, the state support for public higher education in California has been dwindling over the last few years. Although Governor Brown's proposed 2012-2013 state budget calls for the same level of funding for the CSU as this year, that all depends whether the voters approve the November tax initiative. If the November ballot measure fails, the CSU could face an additional $200 million cut, which would drop the university's level of state support to $1.8 billion, the lowest level since 1996-1997. But the CSU as a system is now serving 90,000 more students. System-wide, CSU has decreased faculty and staff by more than 3,000, or 6.6% of its workforce over the past 4 years. In addition, class sizes have increased, faculty have been asked to teach more, and administrative functions have been consolidated. Despite these actions, CSU currently has a $510 million budget shortfall. The result of state funding reductions and then mandatory cost increases are not included. If the November ballot measure fails and the $200 million cut to CSU is implemented, this campus, CSU Long Beach alone, could face a $27 million budget shortfall for next year. CSULB does not have enough temporary resources to manage a cut of this magnitude. This is your public university, a university that provides a world-class education to your sons and daughters and many other family members. I'm sure many of you have gone here as well. So I thought you would want to know the difficulty we're facing due to the diminishing state funding. Despite these dire fiscal situations, however, CSU Long Beach continues to be a great university due to the hard work of faculty and staff over many years. Our graduation rates are at historic highs with diverse students. Our faculty achieves scholarly and creative distinctions. We're engaged in our community and around the globe. Cal State Long Beach has a legacy of shared commitments to quality, to students, and to working together. We highly value the work we do with our business and industry partners. CITT, for many years, has been providing outstanding educational services to the ports and the larger goods movement industry locally and nationally. This annual CounterPoint event is another example of our continued commitment to bring you many excellent educational programs. I also want to thank all of our sponsors of this event. Some of them, you saw it in the slides. We're able to do this only due to the generous support of our sponsors. And all of their names are listed on the back panel of the brochure that you have. At this time, I also want to recognize the many dignitaries who are present in the audience today. The list is long, so please hold your applause until I am done reading all of the names. Representing the City of Long Beach, Council Member James Johnson, District 7. Representing Rolling Hills State, Councilwoman Judy Mitchell from Rolling Hills Estates. Representing the City of Carson, Joseph Pinion, Environmental Committee. Representing the Port of Long Beach, Commission President Susan Wise, Commissioner Rich Dimes, Commissioner Thomas Fields, Commissioner Nick Ceramic, Commissioner Doug Drummond, Chris Lytle, Executive Director. Representing the Port of Los Angeles, Commissioner Dave Arian, Geraldine Natch, Executive Director. Representing California legislators, Helen Ansel, Office of State Senator Alan Lowenthal, Nikki Tennant, Office of Assembly Member Bonnie Lowenthal, Brian Menigino, Office of Assembly Member Warren Furtani, Val Lurch, Office of the Congresswoman Laura Richardson, and the following officers from ILWU, International Longshore and Warehouse Union, are here as well. Kathy Familate, President, Southern California District Council. Joe Cortez, President, Local 13. Mike Perdue, President, Local 63. Danny Miranda, President, Local 94. Louisa Gratz, President, Local 26. And Dominic Miretti, ILWU. Let's give a big round of applause to all of the individuals who are represented today. As I was talking about Cal State Long Beach, and as Marianne told you, we graduate your workforce, your future workforce. Who we graduate, the quality of our graduates depends on the efficiency and the productivity in your industry. So think about us. We are in a tough time financially right now, but as a great university, we will weather this storm, I'm sure. Again, thank you all for coming. We have a distinguished panel for you this evening. I'm sure you will find this program engaging and rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Joshi. Three more things before we get started. I have to make three announcements. The first one is that tonight's proceedings are being webcast, and you can watch the webcast in about a week at an address that is on the bottom of your agenda in the program, I think on page 3. We need your feedback. In your program, you have this green form. Please fill it out. Let us know what you thought of today's event, and also share with us topics that you would like us to address in the future. And finally, if you are a planner, you can earn credit. You can earn 1.5 CM units through the American Planners Association, the APA. If you want credit, please make sure that you sign in on the sheet that is provided for you out at the CITT desk. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the future. Specifically, two versions of the future. As those of you who have been attending our annual events have known, that we like to set the stage of our discussions with a video documentary. By the way, I need to say that the credit for those videos, the one tonight and the previous one, goes to Dave Kelly and his team at our Advanced Media Production. And you should also know that the Policy and Steering Committee members have a big impact in the script for those videos. Anyway, this year, ladies and gentlemen, we decided to try something different with our video. The scene is Southern California in the year 2025. You will watch two newscasts, each describing a very different perspective of the future of goods movement in Southern California. Both are fictional and highly speculative. The first newscast presents what most of us would consider overly optimistic, an overly optimistic view of the future. The second presents what most of us would consider an overly pessimistic view. The scenarios are intentionally extreme, They involve a lot of imagination, exaggeration, and creative license for a dramatic effect. Of course, nobody can predict the future. So our purpose tonight is to stimulate a conversation about Southern California's goods movement industry and to discuss some of the key issues that will influence that future. Neither CITT nor Metrans endorse either of the two visions. We provide them as in the spirit of opening a dialogue. We will show there are two versions. We will show the first one. There's a small break, and then the second one will start instantly. And at the end of the video, Professor Genevieve Giuliano will come up here and be the moderator, and we ask our panelists to take their seats. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the video.
Welcome to the Southland News Network 6 o'clock report on this day, April 1st, 2025. I'm your host, Bob Perkins. Now, our top story tonight involves the record-breaking numbers from the twin ports in the San Pedro Bay. Both the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach are moving consumer goods at a phenomenal rate. Officials estimate that between the two ports, nearly 25 million TEUs, that's 25 million 20-foot equivalent containers, will pass through the local goods movement system this year. These volumes would have been unattainable 15 years ago. So looking back at those difficult years, between 2009 and 2012, it was tough to envision the future level of demand and the simultaneous environmental sustainability of the harbor. As part of that backdrop, there was a general economic malaise across the national landscape. It was also a time of congressional gridlock and massive federal and state budget deficits. To make matters worse, there were major disagreements regionally, locally, and within the community over the issues of growth, land use, air quality, quality of life, the scope of adequate infrastructure improvement, and technological upgrades with the laborers-related concerns. All of these unresolved issues threaten to accelerate a market share decline in the San Pedro Bay as the world economy suffered through several serious downturns. At the time, competition for jobs and cargo intensified as newer corridors through Canada, Mexico, and the expanded Panama Canal made alternative ports and delivery routes for shippers much more attractive. To help analyze our past and how we successfully navigated the transition toward achieving today's milestone announcement, we have with us on a live link Dr. Jeremy Sanders. Dr. Sanders is an economist and a professor of transportation and urban planning at South Bay University. Welcome, Dr. Sanders, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, Bob.
Okay, so let's cut to the chase, sir. Given all the problems I just mentioned in 2009 to 2012, how did the situation in the San Pedro Bay and in goods movement generally finally get turned around? I mean, some folks thought we were going to become an afterthought in goods movement with discretionary cargo taking flight through Panama, Canada, Seattle, Tacoma.
Well, from my perspective, looking back, I believe the pivotal moment occurred during the election cycle of 2012. All of the negative economic factors you mentioned were at play. Unemployment was hovering around 8.5% nationally and between 10 and 12% in California. What happened was there was a kind of group epiphany that occurred among all stakeholders in the local goods movement industry. The first part of the epiphany was realizing that with all of the political gridlock and the massive government debt load, The elections were not going to save us from economic and social decline.
Oh, okay. So what was the second part of the epiphany, as you say?
The second part of the epiphany was recognizing that industry and community leaders had to move forward with a working plan that would direct us toward a kind of green prosperity, if you will. Green can be interpreted in two different ways, both the environmental sustainability aspect and the ability to generate the dollars, greenbacks, it takes to support industry and all of the dynamism it provides.
So what were some of the outcomes of that epiphany? I mean, certainly there must have been many factors motivating a change in the status quo.
Of the many changes that occurred, the primary and most important one was the desire to meet each other halfway. This spirit was embodied by everyone involved within the industry, local government, and the community. Many were certainly motivated by enlightened self-interest, but nonetheless, the movement toward collaboration was the key. One of the results of this collaboration was the creation of a joint powers regional goods movement authority known as the RGMA.
And what was the point of this RGMA?
The purpose of the Regional Goods Movement Authority was to provide oversight, strategic planning, direction, and yes, assess and collect fees as appropriate to stimulate change and improvement. The RGMA kept the focus on two things, efficiency and environmental sustainability. To some, it was a big surprise that sustainability and growth could occur simultaneously, actually in concert with one another in a complementary fashion.
Okay, so let's break it down further. On the one hand, industry was always looking for opportunities to grow, but on the other hand, the community activists perceived more trucks and trains and containers as simply more pollution and more congestion and more health problems and a reduced standard of living. So how did that basic contradiction become reconciled?
There were good reasons for both sides to give ground when compromising for the benefit of the other side. In the case of industry, regardless of state legislative action or civil litigation, it was clear that congestion and pollution had to be mitigated as much as possible just to make the terminals and surrounding areas functional at a higher volume level. Now, when you solve the congestion issue, you've also started to solve a big part of the pollution issue. Using alternative fuels, cleaner trucks, and natural gas vehicles helps tremendously, as does implementing alternative marine powering for ships at berth. Also, as a practical matter, it's hard to work in an environment that disables the workers because the air quality is so poor. No one wants to wear a gas mask just to be able to go to work at the docks.
So you mentioned the grueling litigation by residents living in the shadows of the big cranes. Now, many of those litigants had experienced trucks jamming the freeways during rush hour. And one response by the industry was the Pier Pass program. And as we know, expanding the logistical operations usually entails expanding the physical facilities and jump-starting more developments like the near dock rail terminals that we now have in place. So how did industry and the community come together in a way that allowed for this kind of development and expansion in light of the earlier concerns by that same community?
Well, you identified the Pier Pass program, which successfully incentivized the industry to spread out delivery times. Now, under Pier Pass, we avoided having all of the trucks lining up between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. during the heart of the morning rush hour and the rest of the business day. In addition to Pier Pass, there were major new developments in technology that enabled the trucks to become what we called smarter. This technology made the trucks more efficient in terms of appointments, arrival times, and locating preferred non-congestive traffic routes via GPS devices and the equivalent smart gates at the terminals.
So were there other technological advancements that improved efficiency and sustainability?
Absolutely. In addition to the smarter trucks and cleaner trucks, the electrification process at the terminals, which involved implementing cold ironing, eliminated the use of heavily polluting bunker fuel in ships. Ships in port were always one of the major sources of air pollution. Another technological advancement suggested by the RGMA involved an across-the-board implementation of consistent software standards at the terminals. Now, this made the continuity between terminals much more fluid and flexible. Software continuity helped facilitate more efficient movement through the gates. For labor, it was an advantage because skills became more transportable from one terminal to the next.
So the story is really about discretionary cargo, those goods that arrive at a port but are destined for regions beyond a 400-mile radius. And That's where the real cargo growth and demand occurs, correct?
Yes, that's where the San Pedro Bay had an advantage in terms of capacity and geography, especially when the majority of goods were coming from China and places like Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Taiwan, etc. When some of the manufacturing sectors shifted to emerging markets such as India and Latin America, our enhanced capacity was a key advantage in handling imported goods from those areas as well. Wherever the discretionary cargo comes from, it takes a well-developed rail system to make the intermodal delivery system work. Lots of trains require lots of grade separations if you are going to keep things moving without bringing urban streets to a standstill. The Alameda Corridor was the model for the grade separation process, which continued developing under the RGMA's guidance.
Doctor, I want to address the community's reaction to all of this and how the activists were able to find common ground with the industry and its growth.
Well, for the community, I think there were several issues that mattered. The high unemployment rate, hovering for several years, had made everyone concerned. Often you heard people saying any job is a good job in a tough economic environment. It became clear that a lot of the jobs related to the ports and warehousing were not just good jobs, they were really great jobs compared to work in other service sectors that offered low pay. Now, the recognition occurred that the harbor was not just a generator of pollution and traffic, but was also the lifeblood of the community in terms of economic activity. I'm sure that realization was the most important factor. Now, when it became clear that reducing goods movement meant adding more friends and neighbors to the unemployment line, self-interest began to swing in favor of compromise on litigation issues. Foreclosures and abandoned houses and local shops closing down have a way of getting people's attention at the neighborhood level.
But what about all the important health and lifestyle issues people expressed?
Health issues were always a concern for the community, as you would expect. Ultimately, people tend to feel healthier and have a better life when they have a job, as opposed to when they've been unemployed. Cleaner trucks and alternative fuels also made the air cleaner, so the industry was starting to pass the all-important smell test, quite literally and figuratively. I also think it became more obvious that a productive, thriving industry generates the funding for more progressive technologies and services that can not only clean up after the industry, but also contribute to improving the quality of life in the urban sphere.
Was there anything else the feds did to help the San Pedro Bay in terms of environmental mitigation?
Well, because local industry and local leaders took control of matters in the harbor, the feds were able to assist the local efforts and cast an approving eye on the environmental programs underway in these green ports. Perhaps the most helpful thing done at the federal level was the development of a national transportation strategy for goods movement.
So how did this national transportation strategy enhance the green ports movement?
Specifically on the ecological side, the National Transportation Strategy adopted consistent standards across the board for clean air and environmental considerations at all marine terminals in the U.S. Now, with these provisions affecting every port more or less equally, the West Coast was no longer perceived as being too green to be business friendly. It really helped level the playing field. In the end, forcing the industry to upgrade and become greener was to the advantage of the local operations once the national standards came into effect. The LA Long Beach Harbor had already done a lot of the heavy lifting that other ports around the country were forced to do later at great expense.
Doctor, in the few seconds we have left in this segment, could you give us a final thought to consider as we celebrate the success of the San Pedro Bay?
But before I say goodbye, I just want to say in summary that I've made it sound like all of these positive developments came about quickly, rather easily and smoothly. The truth is, these accomplishments we're talking about today, with 25 million TEUs traveling through a green, environmentally friendly system, occurred after a lot of effort, a lot of planning, collaboration, and a lot of just plain hard work. It was more than a dozen years in the making. Now, you have to think in terms of at least a decade when improving your goods movement process.
Okay, I think we'll leave on that note. Thank you again for joining us, Dr. Sanders.
Again, my pleasure, Bob.
Okay, we'll be right back. Welcome to the Southland News Network 6 o'clock report on this day, April 1st, 2025. I'm your host, Bob Perkins. We open our newscast with another huge warehouse fire in the Southland. This is the third abandoned warehouse to go up in flames in the past 10 days. This time it's in eastern Los Angeles County. The first one was in the harbor area and the second one in San Bernardino County. So far, no one has come forward to claim credit for any of these fires, and authorities do not know if there is any connection between the three blazes other than a possible copycat motive with the last two. What these fires do have in common is they all occur at night. All three of the buildings were completely empty. Containing these infernos requires significant resources from local firefighting agencies because the fires involved huge structures. There is always the threat that flames will spread to adjacent buildings. We've invited a guest with an interesting perspective on the fires to join us tonight for a discussion about them. He is Dr. Jeremy Sanders, an economist and a professor of transportation and urban planning studies at South Bay University. He is with us on live link. Welcome, Dr. Sanders, and thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me, though I wish it was under better circumstances.
So, Professor, what's going on out there with these warehouse fires from your perspective, both as an economist and an expert on urban transportation?
Unfortunately, Bob, I see these fires as a symbolic end, or a flaming out, if you will, of a largely hollowed out industry in Southern California. Now, looking back 20 to 25 years ago, we had a thriving, growing goods movement industry here. It once burned brightly as the source of energy and dynamism for the local economy, which was reeling from a loss of manufacturing jobs. Now, however, because discretionary cargo has moved on to other channels and other regions, the industry has dramatically contracted, so the abiding source of energy, growth, and opportunity is melting away. One after another, these past 10 days, we've seen the abandoned vestiges of that industry burn to the core. Now, if you look at it in apocalyptic terms, the metaphorical analogy would be something like the sun burning out in the sky after heating the earth for many years with life-giving energy.
Sir, that's quite a powerful analogy. And so I'm wondering, what have we lost from the contraction of the goods movement industry in Southern California, and why should we be concerned about it?
I could write a book about all of the lost opportunities and consequences of this contraction. In fact, that's going to be my next project. In summary, we've given away one of the best opportunities we had to keep a strong job base and a vibrant, growing local economy. As I mentioned a moment ago, when we lost the manufacturing jobs that started here during World War II and remained until the early 1990s, 50 years of solid, stable, middle-class employment drifted away and left us with a major social and economic decline that lasted for about 7 years. Old-timers in the real estate business remember it well. One of the industries that developed rapidly and stepped up to provide new opportunities and new relatively high-paying jobs for the blue-collar working class was the goods movement industry. There were abundant jobs for longshoremen and clerks, truck drivers, warehouse workers, freight managers, and freight forwarders. We also had lots of jobs for railroad employees and all manner of logistics personnel.
So are you suggesting these jobs and goods movement sustain the community? How did that happen?
Well, we need to emphasize the multiplier effect. One job with one paycheck not only helps to support a single family, it also contributes to supporting other jobs and businesses in the community. The vast majority of a typical paycheck is spent to cover items like mortgages, car payments, groceries, clothing, and basic supplies and essentials. What's left over often pays for various forms of education, entertainment, and travel. The multiplier effect keeps the dollar circulating throughout the community and provides local businesses with opportunities to expand and hire new employees. Banks and credit unions also become stronger when people have money available for new accounts, and also when people have the ability to afford loans for new purchases.
So what happens when a local industry experiences a steep decline?
When we have an industry in contraction, jobs are lost and the multiplier effect starts to operate in reverse. Not only do the newly unemployed people become traumatized and see their purchasing power begin to evaporate, but those who are still employed also get scared and start scaling back on their spending. Local businesses begin to feel the brunt of it and start laying off their employees. Eventually, These local businesses close as the cycle continues a downward spiral. Soon you have foreclosures in the neighborhood, and then housing prices plummet, depriving people of hard-earned equity in their homes and making it difficult to sell property.
So then what happens when nothing intervenes to interrupt the downward economic spiral?
The consequences can be dire. We learned that in the Great Depression almost 100 years ago now. Locally, when the foreclosures and business closings continue unabated, eventually you end up with a lot of empty buildings, vacant houses, and abandoned warehouses. Over time, these empty buildings can become a real liability and a risk to the safety and sanctity of the community. Empty buildings tend to attract mischief, vandalism, graffiti, theft, and eventually arson. These are all the symptoms of the decline.
When you said earlier that we gave away this industry and the opportunities for growth, what did you mean by that, and how did we give it away?
It was ours to lose about 15 years ago. Goods movement, like any industry, is going to seek the most profitable and most efficient routes for distribution. In 2012, the San Pedro Bay was still handling as much as 40% of the goods that were imported to the U.S. About 2/3 of those goods were discretionary cargo, in other words, bound for other destinations east of the Rocky Mountains. Discretionary goods can come into the country at a variety of locations. The local harbor had the capacity to move containers quickly from the cargo ships to railroad trains that could take it all the way to the East Coast within a matter of days. The system worked well and was generally fairly efficient for about 35 years.
So why was the San Pedro Bay so critical to the nation's overall goods movement process in those 35 years?
Because no other facility in the country had the capacity to handle this kind of massive volume on this kind of gigantic scale. But then things started to change and we lost the advantage. Also, when emerging manufacturing sectors developed in places like India and Latin America, we missed the opportunity to attract that cargo, and we didn't evolve with the times. And what's worse, we allowed ourselves to be picked apart by our competition while we failed to settle our own local conflicts.
And what were those conflicts that allowed our competitors to pick us apart, as you say?
The primary conflict was a lack of collaboration and a lack of vision about the consequences of not cooperating with one another. Now, when ports have to spend their time and resources fighting court battles or threats of litigation, it becomes difficult to do the kind of strategic work which will develop future operations. Environmental impact processes that take forever keep everything in limbo. When the state legislature imposes environmental standards that are a major impediment to growth of any kind in transportation, this also sends a signal to the shippers who are shopping around for better alternatives.
Now, regarding pollution, are you suggesting that people have to put industry's needs ahead of their own health, well-being, and quality of life?
No, I'm definitely not saying that. People should expect to live in a relatively clean environment where the quality of life is good. Industry needs to be a careful steward of its resources and be mindful of the impact on the community. At the same time, industry can't do everything at once. The important thing is to make progress, to adjust to circumstances as they arise, and to be leaders in the kinds of innovative change that make industry sustainable for everyone. The industry tried to be as green as possible, but it wasn't doing enough or doing it fast enough for some.
I don't know if it would be completely fair to blame the industry's decline on health concerns by the community. I mean, surely it's more complicated than that. What else happened to hasten the decline?
Well, on another note, it's important to talk about the intersection of fees and bonds. Container fees are the elastic conduit from cargo movement to infrastructure development. When container fees are assessed for infrastructure improvement through bond financing, shippers can often justify the extra expense if the end result is more efficient movement through the port of entry and the related intermodal system. However, when local or state governments and regulatory authorities start to utilize the shippers' containers as cash cows for miscellaneous revenue collection, the freight can take flight for cheaper, less bureaucratic destinations. Now, once that freight leaves, guess what? The local or state authorities that took on the bond debt now find themselves unable to fully satisfy the payment schedule. Default on these bonds becomes a real possibility.
Okay, sir, I think we'll have to leave it on that somber note. We'll be back in a moment with our next story.
Okay. So you saw some good stories there, right? Hi, everybody. I'm going to figure out where I put this. I'm Jen Giuliano. I'm the director of the Metrans Transportation Center, and I'm a professor at the Price School of Public Policy at University of Southern California. It's my great pleasure to be able to be the moderator tonight. We only give this honor to the best behaved and the nicest people among us, right? And so I've waited a long time for me to get my turn here. I want to first of all thank Dave Kelly and his crew for the advanced video production. This is an amazing process to come up with the video, and I think he deserves a hand from all of us. Okay. We have our speakers here this evening. I just wanted to say, before I introduce them, that the core of the Point Counterpoint event is participation, exchange, and interaction. And so you can see that we have saved as much time as we possibly can for that interaction tonight. So we have a panel, but remember that we also entertain lots of questions from the audience. In terms of our panelists tonight, on my immediate left is Gil Hicks. He is the Director of Southern California Operations for Cambridge Systematics. Mort Downey is the Senior Advisor for Parsons Brinkerhoff, and Jeannie Beckett is Principal of the Beckett Group. We have everybody's bios in the program, so I don't need to go through that right now. But we have an excellent panel. These are people with deep experience, lots of knowledge, and I think probably great insights. In terms of the rules of the game, those of you who have come to these events before know that we have rules of the game. You have two ways to submit questions. First of all, there are microphones at either side, and we have volunteers who are actually at the microphones so that you can find them, okay? You can come on down and stand in line at one of the microphones, and I will be entertaining questions back and forth. You also should have a 3x5 card that has been passed out to you, and you're welcome to write a question on that, and we have volunteers who will be collecting them throughout the next hour or so. So either way will work. In terms of the microphone, we also have rules of the game. You have 1 minute to introduce yourself and ask a question. We only entertain questions. We do not entertain presentations or opinions disguised as questions or anything like that. So always just ask a question. It may actually be helpful if you write your question down and then read it so that you're clear in your mind the question that you really want to ask. I actually have the sort of purview of the chair up here to be able to either say this question is legitimate or this question is out of line. We don't entertain any multi-part questions, so you can't say, I would like to know this and this and this and this, because we will only allow you to ask one thing, okay? And that's so that everybody gets a turn who would like to participate in the discussion. If you do decide to write your question on a 3x5 card, go ahead and list your name and organization if you'd like. And as I say, the ushers will be going up and down the rows here on the sides in order to collect those. Please do, if you're going to use the 3x5 cards, write so that we can read. That's always important, right? I tell my students that all the time. Also, if you can either name a panelist, if there's a specific person that you would like to ask, go ahead. If not, I will pick the person or I will ask for a volunteer from the panel. Panelists don't really have to answer any question. They can also defer, so that's another rule of the game. And we try to entertain as many questions as possible. So that's all of the rules of the game. let us begin. And I'm going to start with the first question. This video, the evening's video, has shown two very different and I would say very imaginative visions of the future. And my question to the panelists is, are we currently on a trajectory to the first vision or to the second? And in your view, what factors will determine whether Southern California is thriving or surviving in 2025? And I'm going to start with Gil.
Thank you, Jen. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to participate. The reality, and I think the truth is, the jury is still out on whether we're going to get Vision 1 or Vision 2. But that's the last time you're going to hear me say that tonight. And the reason I say that is that we have to be positive about our future. We have to have a strong vision of what that is and the motivation to reach that vision. And if we don't, it's just going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we don't think positively along those lines, we're going to get the second vision by default, and we really need to avoid that. Some of the factors for getting us there, or some of the key ingredients, were really excellently described in the video itself. We have to have a collaborative attitude. We have to have a willingness to listen to each other. There's a popular song that I like that has a lyric in it that says, you can listen as well as you can hear. And the ports have really listened to the community, I think. They have listened about their ability to become green and their need to become green, and they've done that. They've really listened, and the community needs to listen also about the need for jobs and economic growth. So thriving is the ability to create that balance between going green and creating jobs, and I think we can do it.
Mort.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you for the invitation to be here. Anything that gets me out of Washington is good, especially this week.
Yes.
I viewed those two presentations as kind of bookends, two extremes, really to get out some points. Outcome will likely be somewhere in between, but it could tend in either direction. I agree with Gil. The jury is still out. There are factors that are within the control of decision makers and actors in this region, and there are factors that are worldwide and national that you can't control. But if you play it right, it certainly can go more towards the positive than the negative.
Jeannie.
I believe it's the same. I think the volume will be there. I think the community and the ports have a choice whether they're prepared for that. Probably 8 years ago, I talked about the same subject. At that point, the projection was 36 million between the two ports around the same time period. I talked about, at that point, that LA Long Beach is more like a water pitcher, and the other ports, whether it's Seattle, Tacoma, the East Coast, are more like the Dixie cups. You can grow a whole port in a year in the good times. So the question is, can you come together to find a solution? And it has to be everybody coming together to first want a solution and then working together to find the solution. If you can't do that, then the negative things can happen. We've seen that both in the current economy, that when volume drops, then that multiplier effect kicks in very, very quickly. People leave town, your experts leave town, then the ship rotations change, and it just becomes a spiral in the negative that's very hard to change.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mort a question while people are gathering their thoughts. Are there examples of other regions that have encountered major freight challenges that are at least comparable to what's happening in Southern California and figured out ways to solve them? And certainly we'd like to learn from those kinds of examples.
Well, one thing that struck me in looking at the two videos, I used to work in New York in the 60s, had a nice office that overlooked the Hudson River, and the only thing that ever would happen out the window was another pier burning down. Now, the good news was that the cargo had moved to other parts within the port, but it really told you that it is a possibility to see everything dry up and blow away. But there are other places that are really dealing with this well, and at the risk of speaking about someone who's considered your competitor, let me talk about Panama. I've done some work down there in the last few years. There is a group who get it. they understood that the ability to move goods and all the things that came as a result of that was the heart of the economy of that country. And with the vision, they said, let's invest what it would take to make our future a positive one. And then what kind of a project can be put together? How can various barriers be overcome? How can it be designed in such a way that it's an environmental plus and not a minus? But it was all on the basis of a nation, I'm sure a nation that's smaller than the population within this area, but one who said, that is our prime asset, that's what drives our economy, let's do what we have to do to make sure that it's a positive for the long term. And we'll see how that all works out.
Gil, the Alameda Corridor is everybody's example, right, of great stakeholders getting together and solving a major infrastructure problem. So we did it once in Southern California. Does this mean that we're capable of doing it again?
Well, it absolutely means we're capable of doing it again, but recall that it took quite a while. It took 17 years of difficult negotiations with various parties, the railroads, all the cities along the corridor, et cetera. But where it started, I think it's important to explain where it all started. And it started with the Southern California Association of Governments plan and adoption into the Regional Transportation Plan in 1984. It was way back then at the end of a 2-year planning cycle. And it's always good to have that regional backing, that regional foundation where there is a consensus regionally that this is a good thing to do. From there, it took an implementing agency. In fact, 2 of them, the ports of LA and Long Beach, took the lead in doing the environmental work, the engineering work, and providing the seed money to get it to go forward. So it's a sequential process. But all along, though, we had to keep a positive attitude about it. There were setbacks, there were conflicts, there were disagreements about what it was going to look like, whether it was going to be at grade or in a trench, and it ended up being in a trench. And essentially, the good thing about that project was it was this balance, it was this green prosperity. It provided additional capacity for industry to move cargo more efficiently and planned for cargo volumes in the future. But it also was a major mitigation project to reduce delay and reduce pollution. So there was truly a win-win solution. I hate to say that it's a cliche, but it was a win-win. And we need to find other win-win solutions for our projects. And we have to realize there will be conflicts and difficult negotiations, but it has to be done hopefully in a civil manner, and people can get their viewpoint out on the table, and compromises need to be developed. The trench was a major compromise, frankly. Originally, the ports didn't want to do it. Later on, they said, yes, that makes more sense, but they listened to the cities along the corridor on that, and the ports compromised. The cities compromised on other issues as well. So it is a difficult negotiation. All of these major projects, whether it be SCIG or the ICTF or the I-710 project, they're going to need compromises. But again, a positive vision, positive attitude, getting that vision implemented is critical.
Thank you. We have a person at the microphone on my left.
Hi, my name is Marcy Bielma. I've been in the ILW as a Marine clerk for 27 years. She asked me to introduce myself. I'm very excited about scenario number 1 because I've been a sustainability advocate for nearly 30 years. My question is, will there be an effort to create sustainable living environments and sustainable homes, or is that limited to transportation infrastructure?
Any panelist?
I'll try. Since I'm out of state, I probably could respond. I think growth needs to be managed, and it needs to encompass all facets. I think you've mentioned many of the facets. It's transportation that generates the cargo availability, which generates the revenue for both the ports as well as the cities and other communities, which then have the resources for some of the social programs and some of the traditional services that cities and counties and regions provide. I think there's the balance of finding for the locals the appropriate, not only good streets, but clean air, good schools, the appropriate housing stock. The whole piece needs to be, as Gil and Morta said, a compromise. It can't be one and not the other.
I might just add that we're expecting something like 4 million more people to be in this region by 2035, and another 1.9 million employees or thereabouts by 2035. I don't think there's any choice. We have to do scenario one. If there's going to be sustainable homes, we have to have sustainable jobs and a sustainable income for these people, or otherwise they won't have sustainable anything. So we really have to move toward that vision and keep it in our mind and not let it, as I said earlier, become a self-fulfilling prophecy on the other side.
We have somebody on this side.
Yes, my name is Paul Sanchez, 38192, International Longshore and Warehouse Union, Los Angeles Long Beach Harbors, Executive Board member. I'd like to direct this to the panel. I'm glad to see that this theme of this is an environmentally sound presentation. My specific question is dealing with cold ironing, okay? The ability for ships to plug into the dock and use the viable power that's afforded to them on the dock instead of using the on-ship generators, which has a tendency to burn large amounts of bulk fuel, bulk crude oil, which does a large amount of the pollution in the harbor. Because in turn, if they do apply those processes right there, it creates jobs. It creates jobs for pile butts and other union tradesmen to build these services to the ships on the docks. But in turn, it's always a big question, where does the money come from, okay? And the money has to come either from bonds, which call it federal regulations, or in turn, federal grants. How in turn can we see to find this money to ensure that we can improve our docks and in turn improve the operation of ships, so no matter how many ships we have, we can keep the docks operating in an environmentally sound manner? Do you people have any answers for that?
That was a multiple question. Laced with a few statements. So the panel may answer whichever of those questions that you would like.
Let me speak to the environmental side first. And it was mentioned in one of the films. One of the key issues here is level playing fields. These are concerns that are nationwide, worldwide, and we really have to try to get improvement across the board so that no one is disadvantaged by doing the right thing. If we can bring about world standards, if we can bring about national standards, then it no longer becomes an issue of competition, it becomes an issue of necessity. And then the way those get paid for is out of the cost of moving goods. No reason that people who are moving goods shouldn't be paying for whatever the consequences of that are, but it has to be within, in my view, a framework of honest competition.
One of the main questions was, how do you raise money for the improvements, whether it be an infrastructure project or an environmental mitigation? I think the starting point is understanding what you want to build, what you want to do, have a clear vision of what that project is, and that takes time. A lot of the times there's debate about what it is going to be. And then secondly, there has to be a strong consensus among multiple stakeholders that are going to benefit from this project, that is what you really want to do. And then if you can have a consensus, you have an opportunity to form a coalition of those same multiple interest groups. And the coalitions have a much more effective ability to raise funds in Washington and Sacramento. But if there is a dysfunctional relationship among all those stakeholders and they're disagreeing on everything, it's very hard to raise money. I've gone to Washington and tried to raise money for the Alameda Corridor, and when we didn't have our act together, they said, go back and get your act together and get your consensus. And we did. We did that. We came back with a strong coalition. That's what helps. But I think there has to be also, again, this win-win opportunity because money comes from multiple sources. There may be grants from the Tiger process, and we've helped obtain some Tiger grants. There's trade corridor infrastructure funding programs that help build projects, and other environmental grants. So again, a lot of it comes down to ability to bargain and develop a strong agreement and a coalition to back it up.
I just have noticed that Geraldine Natz would like to weigh in on this response.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just felt I could answer your question. At Los Angeles and Long Beach, we do have the money to amp the berths. In Los Angeles, 9 of them are already fitted for amping. And we're required to really have the majority of them done by 2014. So we have budgeted that in our next 2 years' budget. And so we do have some bond money. Also, the bond money that's coming to us came with strings attached. So the ports have to go ahead, they have to make the investment in the infrastructure, but in order to get the reimbursement of the grant money, the carriers have to plug in, and they have to plug in more than 50%, which is the base requirement. So the state's not going to allow us to use grant money just to meet a regulation that comes into effect, that we have to do a little bit beyond that regulation in order to get that money. So we're well positioning, we're working with the carriers to be sure we do that, but that was a high priority for us, and so the money will be there.
Thank you, Geraldine.
I think
Okay.
the other one that we may need to remind ourselves on is that as consumers, we may need to pay a little more for our products. That it's not just the ports or the federal government or the local community that should have to pay, but it's the consumer at the end that's getting their tennis shoes, getting their 13 different choices of gum at the grocery store or the local Kmart or the local gas station. That's who the end consumer is. They may have to pay a penny more to provide that greener supply chain.
Thank you. On my left, Dominic.
Thank you, Jen. I have a question for Mr. Hicks. The Thrive scenario that we saw this evening, Mr. Hicks, was based on an epiphany, the idea, the realization that all stakeholders must cooperate in order for success to be achieved. One of the other things that they mentioned was the development of a GMRA goods movement, regional authority, in order to try to carry out the talk and move things forward. Should we be looking at some kind of an organization might help us to facilitate the process of goods movement?
Well, in general, I think an organization like that would be positive because it would give goods movement the recognition that it deserves. The reality is going to be a little more difficult to actually achieve a new organization such as that. And I'm just speaking from a practical standpoint. All of the other agencies that are out there right now, the county transportation agencies, the Caltrans, SCAG, and the Alameda Corridor East Construction Authority, Riverside County, et cetera, all have their own missions, and they are the county transportation agencies are the programming agencies in this region. They have done a pretty good job, I think, in getting a consensus among the groups, particularly for the Trade Corridors Infrastructure Fund process, which was a consensus-building task of trying to figure out where this grant money should go, what projects should be funded and what projects should not be. So in lieu of a brand new agency, that TCIF consensus group, as they called it, worked pretty well as a surrogate for a goods movement agency. But what brought them together in that instance was a special fund, a $2 billion fund provided by state, Proposition 1B, that motivated them to work out their disagreements and competitive instincts among themselves. That was the rallying point. Money is the key thing. The existing agencies will jealously guard the money that goes to transit and highway projects they get from the federal government. I think Mort will probably agree with me on that, that there isn't a whole lot of money from these standard grant programs to share. When there's new money coming in, like the Prop 1B money, specifically for goods movement. These agencies have done a good job. So that is probably the best next thing to a regional goods movement authority. But in the end, sure, it would be great to have a real recognition that it was worthwhile, as long as we didn't usurp the responsibilities and funding authorities and programming authorities of those existing agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks, for your insightful comments.
If I could just follow up on,
Sure.
on one part of that. We're hopeful that we'll see a federal transportation bill in our lifetime. Right now, I'm hopeful that they'll actually do an extension tomorrow for 30, 60, or 90 days to keep working on it. But one of the things we have tried hard to get into this bill, even though it probably won't have much in the way of new money, is some focused freight investment as part of that. The Senate has included that in their bill, the House has not, but they are eventually going to either have to take the Senate bill or go to conference, so there's a chance. But both the House and the Senate are calling for a national freight strategy and a series of nested state plans and regional plans so that those ideas and those projects and those arrangements to execute them will be incentivized by the availability of those federal dollars, and we'll continue to work to try to get that in that bill if we ever get a bill.
I would like to follow up on this, and then I'll give you a turn, Jeannie. It's all well and good to have a freight policy, and I think probably the people in this room would love to see a freight policy, but what they'd really love to see is some of the freight policy being focused on Southern California. And so one of the big questions here is how do Southern Californians actually communicate the case that this is a very important part of the national economy, and that therefore part of the federal pie in terms of funding should be supporting the national role in Southern California. How's that done? And Jeannie, would you like to?
Yeah, I'll try. I think you start with one voice, but that's a collaboration of all the voices. What I've seen, I'm a grant writer for Tiger Grants. I've studied who wins and who loses. The winners have a huge collaboration, whether it's a very small town in Montana that got $10 million. They came in with probably almost 40 letters of support from every level of the politics side, down to the users, down to the local chambers. It was amazing of what they did in a small town in Montana. If Montana can do that, I am sure Southern California can do that, but it has to be a huge collaboration. It cannot be just the ports looking for money, or a county looking for money, or a city. It has to be a joint one voice.
To follow up, given that Seattle is the home of the FAST program, could you say a few words about the FAST program and whether you think that's a model for Southern California?
I think the FAST is a model. It was a one voice of multiple counties, multiple cities, multiple railroads, ports, different entities that came together and prioritized the improvements that needed to be so that cargo could flow better. It required each city putting their ego and sometimes even their regulations aside to work toward first one list, and once that list got approved by the group, then going out for funding for that whole list and working down the priorities from project number 1, 2, and what would happen is you would work locally to try to fund your project, knowing that a piece of that would come out of the FAST corridor money that was more federal, state money. But it was your problem to get it to the point that that money was the last dollar in. And it was your responsibility. If you couldn't do that, then you would move your place in line to a lower place. If federal money came in and you were the next project in line, say you were number 3 in line, and they funded 1 and 2, and they were ready for 3, but you did not have all the funding, then you had to step aside and let 4 go and give your place up, but get back in line. So it's very difficult to convince a small community when they think theirs is the choke point that's really affecting the Pacific Northwest to say, no, you have to give your place up in line. You have to give that $3 million up to a community that's 15 miles north or 15 miles south because it will make the whole system work better. That was a really hard discussion to have. It took years and years to get there, but they have completed it. Many of those projects are now completed. They're working on the second list. The challenge was it was based on a huge percent of federal money. Earmarks were great at that point. Then those disappeared. So now the program is still in effect, but the money is not coming as quickly.
And just an addendum to that is that there is some local sales fuel taxes that were part of the deal.
Yes, it was a conglomeration of, as I said, federal, state, and local money, that each project had a local sponsor. They had to come up with their own funding plans. Part of that, if they were on the prioritized list, was to get money out of that, a quote, pot of money. But they were responsible for the project funding. What Jen was referring to is the state funds came out of a tax at the state level that provided somewhat like your own bonds that provided the $2 million or $2 billion? $2 billion.
We do
I'm in
Bs
Washington
here.
State. We do little things. $2 billion, same kind of process, that there was a funding source. But again, we have the same challenges that most communities and states have. Funding is very limited. We have huge gas taxes. Our economy is very dependent on trade. 1 out of 4 jobs are trade dependent in Washington State. We have huge agriculture. We have Boeing, so that what kind of tips the scale. But it's very important to us to have that trade both in and out of our state.
Okay, I'm going to let the panel go ahead and follow up, but then I'm going to say that we have somebody who's been waiting for a while, so we'll do this first.
Very quickly. What Jeannie's talking about, again, is the power of coalition. If a coalition in Montana can get a grant, that is a very powerful message with 40 letters of support or whatever. And the FAST, of course, was another very successful coalition. We have to emulate that. CREATE is another one in Chicago that has branded their project for railroad improvements very effectively. And so we need to emulate those success stories. And as far as getting our message across in Washington about how important this region is, clearly this is a nationally significant complex down here with the huge amount of cargo that we have. During the Alameda Corridor, we developed data on how many jobs in Indiana and South Carolina and Michigan that were dependent on the import and export volume coming through these ports. And we could actually tell a congressman from Indiana, in your district, there are these exporters and these importers that are doing business with these ports. Because he asked us, why should I call my colleagues on Sunday morning and tell them to vote for this project? And we told them about the connections that we have that impact every state of the union and how important and nationally significant this complex is.
Yeah, I agree completely. When you're making decisions at the national level, you really want to look at national benefits. You really want to say, why is this good for the country? And one area that I think we haven't focused on enough yet is the whole issue of exports. The national economic strategy is really emphasizing a ability to do more exporting. The president's goal is to double exports within 5 or 6 years. Right after that came out, I talked to the Undersecretary of Commerce who has that responsibility, and I said, Francisco, you may be able to generate the exports, but is anybody going to be ready to move them? If you want to have a national policy achieved, you really have to go after what's necessary to make that work. And from the local level, that's the kind of case you have to make if they're going to be federal dollars. Because there won't be a lot of federal dollars, but those that are there are going to be used to leverage for national interests.
And on my left, thank you so much for being so patient.
Thank you. I couldn't do it. I know he was next in line, so
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for being even
Thank
more
you.
patient. On my right.
My name is Brian Addison. I'm the senior editor of the Long Beach Post. As you may or may not know, the Long Beach City Council recently unanimously passed a resolution for the city to apply for a Caltrans grant of $300,000 to approve for a study for the removal of the Terminal Island Freeway. Of course, supporters of it claim that, it will help remove a freeway from a nearby community, along with the possibility of creating a green belt. Detractors, of course, are worried about the traffic at the already congested port in the nearby 710. If the project succeeds, would it contribute more towards Vision 1 or Vision 2 of the hypothetical video presented?
If the project, meaning the elimination of the Terminal Island Freeway?
Yeah, the actual removal.
Well, I think it would contribute to vision number 2, unfortunately, in that it is an artery that serves critical facilities, and it does provide an alternative to the Long Beach Freeway for some of those trips. Alameda Street, as you know, was widened with federal money all the way up to the 91 freeway. So a combination of Alameda and Terminal Island Freeway, I would hate to just give away a vital piece of infrastructure that cannot be replaced easily. But it goes back to finding the balance that we talked about earlier. There may be concerns about the traffic on that, but there needs to be the greening of the facilities all throughout the supply chain. So unfortunately, I think it would probably contribute to the second vision, not to the first.
Okay, and now on my left.
Thank you. My name is Titus, and I'm with JB Hunt Transportation. And one of the questions that I have is, with fuel going up the way that it is, and intermodal being one of our largest transportation tools that we use today, where do you see our intermodal system going to become more green, as well as where do you see transportation capacity increasing or decreasing with the current fuel system that we have? I know it's a double question, I'm sorry. I can acknowledge that.
I think the price of fuel is the driver that will make for a more efficient intermodal system. Ray LaHood and John Picari at DOT always talk about, let's move things as far as we can by water and then get them onto rail and just deliver the last mile by truck, because that's environmentally sound. But with fuel prices going up, it's also going to be the economic decision. Economics will drive things, but that will be a drive in the right direction.
You have a great intermodal system here, heavily supported by the 2 main railroads. I believe on-dock rail. That was one of the successes we had in the Pacific Northwest. You're improving, having more and more on dock. The more you can get on rail, if it's moving out of state, the better off you are. It's known to be environmentally more friendly than trucks, unless everything goes electric. You can move, you see the CSX ads, you see the BN ads, you see the UP ads of how many miles you can move per gallon, per day, so it is very environmentally friendly. There's some yards that need to be improved here or actually allowed to be built so that more can get on rail. I'm not sure what the actual percentage that goes on rail right now.
Well, on the import side, about 38% of all the imports are handled, it's called inland point intermodal. These are intact shipments of containers, marine containers, all the way out to, say, Chicago or Memphis. Another 40% or so is sent out in 40-foot containers and transloaded into either a 53-foot domestic container or a 53-foot domestic trailer. And about 2/3 of that transload is transloaded to rail, and about 1/3 is transloaded to truck. And the rest is local. Around 21% or so is purely local. So a lot of it ends up on trains, which is a good thing. but you can't totally eliminate trucking. It's never going to happen because the warehouses are needed to do that transloading operation and to store cargo for future distribution later on. So trains are really critical for this region. Having the lift capacity to handle it is critical. And as Jeannie alluded to earlier in the grant discussion, we're in a competitive environment. And Mort alluded to it by his comments about Panama. We cannot be complacent about what other regions and what other countries are doing. We have to stay ever vigilant to prepare for this competitive process. There's about $18 billion worth of projects in the Gulf Coast and East Coast ports that are being planned to help steal cargo from our region. Another $6 billion worth of railroad projects on the East Coast and Gulf Coast areas. Not to mention the $5.25 billion being built into the Panama Canal. So while some analysts feel we're going to have a bunch of diversion to the Panama Canal, some feel it would be fairly minimal. The truth is no one will really know until it's really built, but we can't afford to be complacent about it. We have to get our own projects, our railroad projects built, our highway projects built, and move them faster. And that's why we're working on another coalition called Beat the Canal, and other members of the audience are participating on that too. And we need to do a good job of competing.
Okay, I think we have another question on my right.
Yes, hello, my name is Ian McMillan, and I'm here representing myself as a local resident. And I apologize right now for asking a very oddball, off-the-wall question, but I think it's an important one. There's a lot of high-level thinking and strategy that we're talking about, and I think I really appreciate that. I think we all do. As a quick background, you know, over the next 25 years, there's roughly about $500 billion that's projected to be spent on transportation to kind of push us towards Vision 1. That's in the most recent regional transportation plan. About that same time frame, 25, 30 years, there's a prediction that there's about a 50-50 odds of the big one earthquake happening here. And when we think about the big one, that's Hurricane Katrina level or worse to our region. And I'd like to hear what the panelists think about high-level planning that is happening to address what happens after the big one, considering we're already thinking about $500 billion without it. Thank you.
Well,
I can tell you about studying.
well, recovery plans are probably in the work, aren't they, Chris? The recovery plans are part of the port strategic planning. And there's also studies about the inevitable sea level rise that may impact the terminals. It's maybe not quite as traumatic or as intrusive as an 8.0 earthquake could be. But the ports have to have contingency plans. And if they don't, a lot of cargo is going to be missed. And so they're playing scenarios about what happens, about how to get people off the terminal island in an emergency, for example, how to move the cargo in other ways. If the 710 is shut down or whatever, you've got to be able to move it somewhere else. Heaven forbid if one of the bridges fell down, they've got to be able to move it out. So they're doing these contingency plans. I can't tell you the exact details of it. Chris could, but I can't.
And I think they're also being looked at a national level. I mean, the resilience that's needed for the national economy means we need a certain amount of redundant capacity in order to deal with uncertainties.
The shipping lines and the shippers are also looking at contingency plans, whether it's a national disaster, labor issues, a community that chooses not to grow. They're looking at the Four Corners approach, so there are choices that they're in those other ports on those four corners so that if one of those does go down, they have three other choices.
It brings back the other question about the Terminal Island Freeway. Why remove one of your arteries if you don't have to?
I just wanted to mention that the universities do a great deal of research on this very topic. And there are all sorts of studies that are done to figure out exactly what would you do if the bridge came down, or if this happened, or if that happened. So there's a whole field of research, and there's a huge amount of preparation that goes on within all the major government agencies and major industries in Southern California. I would like to change the subject because there's a question from the audience that I think a lot of people in this room would really be interested in hearing, and that's the issue of automation at the ports. One of the ways, it is argued, that we can reduce pollution is to use various forms of automated equipment. So the question is automation one of the answers for reducing pollution? And if it is, does it create more jobs or does it eliminate jobs? Deep silence.
I know this is a touchy subject for the folks in the audience on automation. However, I think automation is going to be inevitable, and hopefully it will not reduce jobs. In fact, I know that the unions, both LA and ILWU, are very keen on making sure that the jobs are still preserved, even though automation comes into the terminals. It's not just a question for terminals, it's a question for the entire logistics chain, and that includes truckers and the railroads and the warehouses and all the information exchange that takes place. And we are doing some studies about how much intelligent transportation systems could help the flow of cargo, having message machines on the freeways to tell them where the congestion is located. And I know the shippers and the truckers are really keen on trying to make sure that they can get in and out of the terminals as quickly as they can. I think progress is being made, but there can be improvements made in terms of the information available to truckers about where the delays are occurring. And there may be technology that can help with that, GPS or otherwise, that can improve the situation. I think we all need to keep an open mind about it, and I think it will create jobs in the long run. Because it'll allow throughput to continue, congestion reduced, and therefore the Vision 1 can be more realized because of that. And again, it's a series of compromises that folks will need to make, I'm sure.
I guess my answer would be, this morning I was at the Pulse of the Ports, heard from, I can't remember which speaker was, but of how long the wait times for certain truckers are on dock. If I heard it correctly, a lot of that was either due to fat keying of a number, transposing a number. So there was some human intervention that caused some delays. If technology could be used to improve that, so that improves the throughput and the velocity, I think everybody's going to have better jobs, more jobs. If we think of just automation versus taking people off docks, that can be very safe, but it may not provide the jobs in your community. It may provide more jobs, but they may not be on dock or near dock. So I think we have to be careful which verb we use and what we mean when we pick a verb. That are we really looking for, is it really automation or is it technology? Are you trying to move the supply chain quicker, safer, faster, cleaner? You know, which of those pieces are you trying to answer instead of just throwing out one verb and saying, oh, that verb's bad?
And if the goal is really to improve the productivity of the system, the key issue will be how are those productivity improvements going to be shared?
Right, how will they be distributed? On my right.
I think I'm going to be fair. I believe the gentleman there is in charge.
Go ahead. It's all right.
But he concedes, so fine, I'll go forward. My name is John Taileifi, and I'm with the West Long Beach 90810 community. And it seems the message is very clear here, and that is, in order for us to be competitive and receive commerce here in our West Coast ports, particularly Long Beach and Los Angeles. We have to collaborate. We really must. And so, in fairness to the community as to what was illustrated there, I think if I speak to job opportunities, that is what we need, and with some green consideration for better improved life conditions. So having said that statement, I want to say, do any of the panelists, can you cite if a situation exists across the country that has blended the community concerns in effect and moved forward the mission of competitiveness in a seaport? And that would be my question that I'd like to present and ask.
Yes, and it's right here in LA, Long Beach. With the Clean Trucks program, for example, they've reduced pollution from trucks by 90% in a matter of 3 years. An astounding success, in my opinion. I helped work on that program in 2008 when the program was just beginning. They listened to the community about the importance of diesel pollution and its impact on health. And to their credit, I think they took it to heart and they really worked on it. The Clean Air Action Plan is the overall umbrella program. The Clean Trucks program is just a part of the emission reduction program. I'm sure there are folks that think that more is needed, and there probably is more is needed on the other aspects of emissions in the region. So it's clear that emissions have a negative impact on health. But a question that never seems to get asked is, what is the impact of poverty on health and the impact of homelessness and joblessness on health? There are clear statistical correlations between poverty and health. All you have to do is go online and search correlation between health and poverty, or impact of poverty on health, and you get a whole slew of very credible academic studies documenting those relationships. So I think the community also needs to listen to that story about jobs are critical to this region for health reasons as well, both physical health and mental health.
Anybody else?
I think we all need to step up. How many in the audience took mass transportation to get here tonight? Okay, so there's a handful. And San Diego, thank you, all 50 of you. That's good, but there are more contributing factors other than just the port to our air quality, and I would encourage you all to think about what you do each day and how you can improve the air quality by your basic activities.
Okay, gentleman on my left.
Thank you. I'm Mike Gentili. I'm a K down at the Casual Hall, longshoreman. I'm also a teacher at middle schools in Long Beach Unified. And a lot of people have their interests in this economy, of course, and I'm wondering what spark that it would take for the competing interests. We've talked a lot in generalities. Obviously, I understand that for this format. But what spark specifically would it take for LA Long Beach to say, this is what's happening. You know, we're losing such and such off the 44% of trade that we see from the Pacific Rim. If we're moving 11 TUEs now, 11 million, and we're going to go to 25, 30 million in 15, 20 years, it's a great conversation. Thank you to the people that put on this forum. But what initial, because you know, things happen that are urgent. A lot of people have interests in this area, especially with trade in this region. But what specifically would have to happen for it to kick it up to the next level, to have this collaboration that we've been talking about?
So do I understand your question is what would cause the epiphany from the movie? Okay. What would cause
my recommendation, and I've used this before in my career, particularly with the Alameda Corridor, is to explain very vividly the consequences of failing to agree on a vision, failing to build the necessary infrastructure, failure to agree and collaborate, and then the decision makers can see what they have wrought, so to speak, if they don't know what the consequences of doing nothing are, they're not going to do anything. But if they are motivated by a negative vision, hopefully they will respond to develop the necessary consensus, because they don't want that negative vision to materialize. And that was the real beauty of the videos, frankly. It helped illustrate two different visions. But it may sound a little bit like negative marketing, but you have to do that in order to explain, if you don't do anything, you're going to get this. What I worry about is that the region will choose the do-nothing alternative by default, which has the same consequences of consciously doing nothing. But through, hopefully, this consensus-building process, this dialogue, we can avoid the do-nothing alternative.
As well as taking that conversation to talk about the positive side of the positive alternative. Absolutely. And it isn't just more economics, more jobs, but it's also greener. It's also better for the community. If we put those goals out as part of the equation.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question. We haven't explicitly talked about leadership. And it sounds to me like when we talk about this epiphany idea, there's an element of leadership in it. So what is the role of leadership, and where are the leaders? Or do we need leaders, or is this all bottoms up?
Absolutely, leaders are needed. Leader has to have both vision and staying power. These are not things that happen quickly. They aren't necessarily things that bring instant success for a leader, but if the vision is there and the long-term commitment is there, then you can begin to see results. But there does have to be a leader to make this happen.
Another word for leader is champion. And to make a project, turn a project into reality, you need to have champions. Either you select them, or in the best of all worlds, the champions come to you and say, what can I do to help? And we had several good champions in the Alameda Corridor who went forward and promoted that project every chance they could get, because they knew the merits of it were there. And champions and leaders are supported by coalitions. And people want to join a coalition that is a success story in the making. But if you have dysfunction and disagreements and arguments, guess what? The champions hide under the table and go away. They don't want to be associated with controversy. They want to be associated with a vision that will move us all forward. But you can't have a coalition without a consensus, and that goes back to the beginning stages of the project, where you figure out what you really want to do and get agreement about what you want to do.
I think Gil is right, that champions are very visionary, and if there's no followers, they'll move on to the next vision. They don't have the patience to stick on one if nobody wants to go with them, because they're so visionary. It's like, okay, you don't want to do this? Well, let's try this. And if you don't want to do that, I got 3 more, 5 more, 6 more things. But those visionaries or champions need to come from every level. We talked about, is it the politicals at the federal level? Yes, but it's also at the state level, it's at the community level, it's the local Joe and Jane. That's where your champions come from. It may not be your elected officials. It may not be your port director. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It has to be somebody that has passion, that can bring followers with them.
And those followers, as part of a coalition, are going to get more of what they want to achieve than by being on the outside.
And give the champions material to work with, information, facts, statistics, studies that have credibility, and they can use that in their arguments with their colleagues.
Do we have critical stakeholders that have to be part of the solution? I mean, we could name 100 different communities,
I think,
groups, et cetera.
Many that we've talked about tonight, the ports there can't be a champion without the ports agreeing that this is what the port vision is, whether it's the commission, the executive, the staff. They have to be all moving in the same the community has to moving in the same direction. Your state electeds have to be moving the same direction. If you're all going 10 different directions, nobody will get to that one vision.
Okay. I hope I'm right, that this is the next person.
Good evening. Michael Ponce, Secretary of ILW Local 63. I was also at the Pulse of the Ports this morning, and the question posed to Mr. Curry about the turnaround times, he actually said he was not qualified to answer that. It had nothing to do with rekeying. And actually, if you look around the world with Antwerp, Rotterdam, and Hamburg that has technologies and automation, you see a big decrease in gross moves per hour. How do you see the ports going to keep up with this volume increases to 25 million TEUs by 2025 when you see this automation moves maybe 16, maybe 20 at best, when the longshore ILW moves 30 plus moves per hour? How are we going to keep up with these volume increases with the decrease in port productivity and efficiency?
I guess my answer would be, is it truly automation, is it technology, or is it productivity? The end goal is productivity, correct?
Yes, and you have a big decrease in productivity with automation.
So I would argue if that's not the answer, then how do you, as a community, figure out what those drivers are to increase that productivity? I worked on a study in Tacoma where we found that when there was competition and we double cycled the cranes, we could get 60, 65 moves per hour on the same old equipment we had. We had to figure out the ratio of land equipment to crane equipment, and you had to set up the ship accordingly. It's that whole system that we're not very good at. What I found working at the Port of Tacoma is the ship was stowed based on the convenience of the original port, not on end destination. So when the ship pulled in and we needed to get the auto parts off, they weren't on the top. We had to dig way down. If they were all stowed on the top for that to be the first train out, that productivity would be much higher throughout the supply chain, whether it was longshore, whether it was a trucker, whether it was a port employee. You know, the whole thing starts from whether we call it automation, technology, better use of human resources. You have to look at the different places through the supply chain and figure out where those sweet spots are. You can't just pick out one piece and say, well, automation's bad here, technology should be used there. You have to look at that whole supply chain.
And didn't you have another success with the business exchange program?
We had a lot of successes where at the Port of Tacoma, we took over managing the inflow and outflow of the rail. Even though we had 2 rail providers, the Port of Tacoma decided that was really their niche. We had 4 intermodal yards, which I know is small compared to you guys, but the whole idea was we needed to make sure that flow stayed consistent. It's kind of like Lucy in the Candy Factory, that, you know, if your pipeline is flowing at the same time, your productivity increases, nobody has to stop and wait for the next piece. We had the problem of how the trains come in and out. We had to use every slot to make sure there was a train on that slot to keep our productivity and our capacity flow correct. So we decided that was our niche, was to take over, and we had multiple meetings all day long, as well as we used technology through, it started with an Excel spreadsheet on when each shipping line was supposed to have their trains ready to release. On those calls, if your ship was late, you needed to report it and say, okay, I'm going to be 6 hours late, and we found who could take that slot. We didn't wait for that slot to be missed because somebody didn't get labor, forgot to order labor, you know, whatever the reasons are that somebody misses their slot, it was the port's responsibility to keep their flow working, that whether they replaced it with an inbound train, with an outbound train, however that worked. We also built a lot more support tracks on dock or near dock, so we had the ability to bring those trains in, and they were ready. As soon as the first one was released, the next one was brought in. We unloaded it, reloaded it right away, and it was ready to go out very, very quickly. It's that whole chain. It can't be just the cranes going fast or buying faster cranes. It's got to be, each piece has to be in perfect balance. And it's, there's a very little tolerance once one piece falls off.
On my left.
There's a saying that says, where there is no vision, the people will perish. And in my experience, sometimes when you attend meetings, you want to address like the social impacts of job losses. And they say, well, this meeting is here to address goods movement or something like that. So if there was an allegiance to the vision, this epiphany that you speak of, maybe there'd be the kind of collaboration you're talking of, because I see that we're at a crossroads of change that's unprecedented in history, and that, there's automation and job losses, and where do people turn to for income? And, that's why there was such a big movement in the past year with the Occupy movement. So I'm looking forward, I'd like to know, who do you turn to? Who are your consultants and your great thinkers that you turn to for answers on the social impact of job losses?
Who do we turn to for understanding the social impact of job losses? Well, I think every family is talking to other families. That's probably their initial consultants, is what's happening to you down the street? Are you losing your home? Are you underwater on your mortgage? What is the impact on your family life? How has it affected your marriage and your children's relationships with yourselves? All of these mental related impacts of job loss and poverty are very critical. And we can't be complacent about our future and about our competitiveness with other regions. We've got to stem those tides and bring everybody up and provide the job opportunities. And I don't see how we can do that without this vision number one, providing the green prosperity. We have to do it. Do we really have a choice when it comes right down to it? So consultants on that, there are a lot of academics and a lot of researchers who have studied these issues and the impacts of low income on health care. Obviously, you have less access to health care. You do less health screenings. There's more depression. All of these things are associated with joblessness and poverty. And we've got to stop this, and we've got to move forward with green growth. And the ports here clearly have gotten that message that growing green is the only way they're going to grow, and they're going to do it. But I think there is a possibility. And again, from the very beginning of this meeting, I said, we're not going to be negative about it. We have to be positive. Otherwise, it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy the other way around.
I think there's lots of examples, especially in the Midwest, Detroit, of communities that manufacturing has been lost and there hasn't been another replacement to date. They're looking at, they're very visionary, but it's not happening yet. So it's not just having visions, but it's being able to implement and convincing others that that vision is right. And there's a lot, if you look at planning, there's a lot of studies that planners are taught in school about land use, food, communities, low income, high income, and all those drivers.
And one of the always important drivers is, what is the competitive advantage of your region against others? And being a leader in goods movement is a competitive advantage in this area that you do not want to leave untapped.
Okay, we're gonna, if there's anybody else who wants to ask a question? Yes.
My name is Patrick Kelly. I work for the Teamsters Union, and I don't want to make a discordant sound here, but you're talking about jobs, and I'm going to speak on behalf of the organized portion of the 99%. I saw what happened in New York when the ILA went from 40,000 jobs to 4,000 jobs under the guaranteed annual income. And I've been out here for about 21 years, and I don't know how many longshore jobs have been lost out here under the mechanization and modernization thing. But to sit here and tell this group that there's going to be a lot of job gains in the port, hey, I was born at night, not last night. I haven't been to any of these places where they've automated and robotized the containerization and the offloading, and I'd like to know, what's your solution to that point? What do we tell the 15 or 20% of people in LA or in the port that are out of work? How does this deal work for the 99 and for the stakeholders? That's my question for anybody that wants to answer it. Thank you.
Well, briefly, I don't think stagnation is going to put anybody to work. We have to continue to grow in order to provide opportunities for the new 4 million people that are going to be living here. Another 1.9 million employees, what jobs are they going to have? Stagnation is an unsustainable economic model. So we have to work out these automation issues and the technology issues and keep the jobs. How exactly, I don't have all the answers to this, but I do think we have to be ever vigilant about creating growth opportunities and keeping the green opportunities as well.
Okay.
I'm talking about flow. That doesn't mean less jobs. It means that you're provided with the technologies that help you do your job better. When I talked about fat fingering, it may not be on the dock. It could have been somebody in St. Louis that transposed a number. It's how do you prevent those different errors from occurring so that each one of you can do your job the best you can. And you don't have to be down because somebody else didn't do their job correctly.
And I think we have a last question on this side. Oh, well, come on up, who's ever first, and we'll just go ahead.
Hello, my name is Erin Wimberly. I also stand in solidarity with the 99%. Most of us have more time than we do have interest in money, and we have a thirst for knowledge and a cleaner earth and community. You spoke of letter writing, and you spoke of community as well. What can we do with our free time to help spread the word about the fact that we need to be paying attention to this issue? What can we do as far as letter writing? What can we do proactively to make sure that we are thriving in 2025? That's my question.
I think there's really great opportunities in the political process. Your elected officials have to be responsive. They have to know what you want. They have to have the vision of where the region can go, but they have to hear from you and then be supported. So being in the middle of that process is time well spent.
I think you educate yourself on your passion, whatever that, whatever your personal vision is. Use some of the time to educate yourself and then go out and be your own champion on whatever those things are, whether it's talking to your electeds, writing letters, working in your community on that championship that is in your heart.
Thank you. Nice. I think we have number 2 on our left.
Thank you.
And
my name's Neil Yeshin. I'm an instructor in the GLS program here at Cal State Long Beach, and I've been an international freight forwarder and a licensed custom house broker for 48 years. And like you, I saw the fires at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Fortunately, they only went to Jersey, so the jobs didn't go too far. But 20 years ago, I saw the difference between what was happening on the East Coast compared to what was going to happen on the West Coast. So I moved to LA. And sure enough, China, Taiwan, Singapore, the entire Far East blew up and made Los Angeles the largest port in the country. They weren't when I first moved here, they are today. And they have done a fabulous job in handling it, as far as I'm concerned, to this point. And I do see the very strong possibility for the first scenario that we saw today, if things are handled right. There's a lot of communication going on between the ports and communities, but there's somebody else I think that we left out. With all the increases in these containers that are going to be coming in on these vessels, God bless them, U.S. Customs and the Department of Homeland Security have a vision of X-raying 100% of these containers. How are we going to flow that volume if they're not involved in this whole process? And I don't hear that they are involved.
Definitely, as we heard before, it's an overall chain of things that have to happen, and they have to be part of that. I mean, they've been tasked with that mission not because they thought it was necessarily a good idea. The Congress said, you will do this. They didn't give the resources, but they said, you will do this. It's a technological issue. It's a management issue. It's something we do have to recognize. If it needs to be done, we've got to put the resources towards it, both technological and manpower related, to not have it be the deterrent. There is sometimes the feeling in Homeland Security Department that they're just there solely to make sure nothing bad happens. And we've got to figure out how they see their role as encouraging the good things to happen while they prevent the bad things from happening. That was one of the reasons I was not a happy camper when the TSA was removed from the Department of Transportation.
I think a lot of that came from a public outcry of, what do you mean you don't know what's in the container at 100%? So some of it's our own fault, not personally, but as a group, that we let public think sometimes change things that aren't true. That there is a valuation of every container. Not every container has to be opened, looked at, or x-rayed, or vacuumed, or whatever the current technology is. But every container should match the specs. If it says it's oranges, it probably shouldn't be coming from Alaska. It just, you know, there's some profiling on those containers that must happen, but not every container needs to be physically inspected.
There's another group of stakeholders that we, of course, absolutely have to listen to. And I'm sorry it doesn't address your question, but of course the shippers. The shippers are the ones that route the cargo. The ocean carriers do not. And so I'm a transportation planner, but I'm learning more and more every day that I need to know more about logistics. And thanks for GLS and the whole program here in Long Beach that is training people in logistics, understanding how cargo flows, how the stakeholders in that industry make decisions, what's important to them, because if we don't listen to them, then we really don't understand goods movement. And so I think it's really important that those stakeholders be part of this collaboration. Groups like the Coalition for Responsible Transportation, which involves truckers and shippers and other parties that in the railroads, of course, as well, third-party logistics operators, transloaders, intermodal marketing companies, all these people in the logistics chain have a very important part to play, and we need to understand how those business models work.
Okay, and I believe there's a last question.
I'm John Hargrave, casual at the Port of LA Long Beach, and I've been a casual, you know, before they tried to implement these computers in some of the trucks, and it's gotten rid of a lot of the clerk jobs, and I just see if you guys are trying to, and it also slowed down the job like considerably. A lot of the times the computers are malfunctioning, we need to talk to the boss, do this and that. So, and well, that's like one of the things. I think that the mechanization has already like hindered the productivity. Number two is all the outsourcing to like Canada and Mexico, and how's that logistically being smart when that's like almost anti-American. I think this country is tired of having all their jobs outsourced to all these other people, you know. It might save you a couple dollars here and there, but I mean, we're like your people, you know, Americans, and if you're going to give them all the jobs to Canadians and the Hispanics, you know, I mean, what are we going to do with all these mechanized computers and no cargo to move? And, you know, and another thing is, I thought you guys already implemented the green trucks and all that stuff, and that was a big thing. And how are we going to get it any more green, you know, start planting trees in the, you know?
Okay, thank you. Any responses? Somebody has to respond. You've left our panel speechless, which is, and if you knew these people, you would know what an amazing thing that is. I want to actually, typically, do we have another question here? Okay, very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. Good evening, my name is Bobby Olvera. I have a question for the panel, anybody can answer. When you talk about losing jobs on the dock, these are good paying middle-class jobs that provide for families in this community to send their kids to school, spend money in the community, purchase homes. And then you talk about the change will be less jobs on dock and more jobs inland. Those jobs are entry-level jobs, low-paying jobs. You can't make a living, you can't support a family, and you most definitely can't afford to get health insurance on those types of jobs. So how is the displacement of good middle-class jobs here being replaced by low-wage jobs inland good for this community? And I'd like any of you guys to answer that.
When you say inland, are you referring to where? Inland Empire or where?
As we move the cargo, it's going to go into Skig, and you talk about warehouses. You know, we saw it there, warehouses inland. They talk about warehouses probably in Chino, San Bernardino, Lancaster. How are those jobs going to better this community? We're the stakeholders. We're the taxpayers. We're the homeowners. We are the community. We are the Port of Long Beach. We are the Port of Los Angeles. How is taking good jobs from us and giving them to entry-level 19 or 20-year-olds making $10 an hour in Riverside, how's that going to do us well here? It'll do the companies well. It will do mega stores well. But how does it, the basic everyday man and woman, how does it better them?
Well, the container still has to come through the port first. And so the longshoremen are handling it initially. So those jobs aren't going away. They still have to handle it, whether it moves out on dock rail or whether it's trucked to a warehouse wherever. So the longshore are still part of that whole process and will be supported by this growth. But it depends on the kind of cargo and what the retailers and the importers are doing with that cargo. Having additional jobs in warehousing and transloading seems to be a plus to me. It's not taking jobs away, as you alluded. It's adding another level of jobs, and I don't see the connection.
Let me maybe clarify. How is taking somebody that makes $60,000, $70,000 a year, able to afford a home in Long Beach, able to spend money in Long Beach, how's taking that job away and transplanting it with a $30,000 job with somebody that lives in the Inland Empire? How does that benefit this community?
Well, I don't understand why the job is being lost. Maybe you can explain that.
Well, as you said, the jobs will be lost on dock because as automation comes in, this was under the line of questioning for automation. As automation comes in, and I can't remember which panelist it was, made a very clear statement. The jobs that will be lost will be on dock. And that was very clear. That was very clearly made to this group here tonight.
I think I referenced that. That was not my intention of what you would hear from my statement. What I was trying to articulate is that we need to increase our productivity, not only at our West Coast ports, but our East Coast ports to compete internationally. To do that, it takes a lot of people to do the best job every day. I am not suggesting that we moved jobs off dock. I'm suggesting that each of us in the supply chain figure out what's causing us to not be as productive as we want to be, and figuring out how to work up and down the supply chain so that everybody has a job, that we all are more productive, that we're all safer, we're all cleaner, so that more jobs can be produced, so that our communities have more revenue to provide those social both services as well as regular services that a community has, whether it's roads, schools, et cetera, you have to have the basic job. If we go to scenario 2, it could be exactly what you're referencing, as well as the speaker to the left is referencing, that if the volume disappears, then all the jobs disappear. And they could be in Canada, they could be in Mexico, they could be in Chicago, they could be someplace in Memphis. If we do our job right, it'll bring the tides up, like all, tides float all boats. Everybody will improve. There'll be more jobs for everybody. There'll be more jobs on dock. There'll be more jobs in Chicago. The whole supply chain improves, and we're more competitive than other ports.
Okay, I appreciate your candor and your creativity and truly not answering the question about this community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Typically, first of all, I want to thank our panel for answering lots and lots of questions, and then I'm going to take just 2 minutes to give you the wrap-up of what I think we heard. So the first thing is, let's give a hand to our panel for lots and lots of incredible answers. We have a tradition here to end the evening with a few thoughts in terms of what are the takeaways from all the things that we heard. I think what we heard was, first of all, you have to think positive. I really relate to this as an associate dean. You're always doing things that people really may not want to do at the beginning. And if you weren't thinking positively, they would never get done. Second, and parallel to the think positively, was the point that Vision 2 is the default option. This is what happens if people do not collaborate. The second point that I heard is that we're part of this very complex system. Los Angeles Long Beach is a really important point on a global system, but it's still one point. And so everything has to work in all directions, not just in Southern California, but in all the connections that Southern California has, which means that there are a huge number of stakeholders that are actually involved in this collaboration. The third thing I heard is that productivity is absolutely essential. And some of you who don't get out of Southern California very much, I don't think appreciate how wonderful things are in terms of what this region has actually accomplished. When those of us who study all over the world wander around, we're always asked, how is it that you've been able to do so much in LA Long Beach? How is it that you've been able to make those ports more productive than any other port in the United States? How did that happen? How did you manage to have green points? These things are just incredible to other audiences. So I think one of the takeaways is that many people here have done an incredible job, and the real question is, can we keep doing it? That is to say, can we make the next steps? There was a point about money. Money is key, and as it turns out, the only way you can get money is to be organized and collaborate, right? So we're back to where we started. And then the final point that I heard is that there is a very strong connection between the economic health of a community and the actual health of the population of that community. That is to say, we can't have healthy communities without having communities with a healthy economy. And given that this port is about 12% of all the jobs in the region or something like that, somebody will correct me, that means that this is actually critical to all of Southern California. And a final point is that I keep saying Southern California for a reason, and that is that this is a region and those linkages of the ports are intense and they go all over the region. So with that, I think I'm going to turn this over to Mary Ann. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. This was a really interesting discussion.
Well, thank you, Professor Giuliano, for an amazing job. I believe everyone in this audience understands how difficult it is to be the moderator, fielding question, and then come up with a summary. I'm truly impressed, and thank you so much, Jen, and thank you again to our panelists. We have a little plaque for you that I give you as soon as I'm off the microphone as a little token of our appreciation. This concludes our program. I mentioned earlier, please fill out the evaluation. I'm a stickler for evaluation. I want to know what you thought, and I want to hear also your suggestions for future topics of our event. I want to say thank you to all the people involved to make this happening. I see Dave Kelly back there. Thank you for the video. Alex Traver, many of you spoke to her when you came in. She is the event coordinator, and she had an amazing team with Diane De La Terre, Robin Seals, Angeli Logan, and numerous volunteers, many students that were involved. Thank you to the people who host the program, to the organization that hosts the program, CITT, Medtrans, and CCP, the Center for I forgot the name of my college here. The College of Continuing Professional Education. We just got a new name in my defense. I want to say thank you to all our sponsors listed here. Without that, it would truly not happen, and many are sitting here. Thank you for that. Thank you to you for staying so long. It is a long evening, a lot to digest. Let me tell you that we have the proceeding of this event, and those proceedings will be posted. We're going to have a different, completed summary that will be posted as well. And the video is for sale if you're interested on the website. We even give it away if you want to teach with it. Let me see what else I have. And I would be very much interested in the answer, if you have any answers, whether or not we are ready to accommodate the growth in containerized freight in the near future. So please let me know. And with this, thank you again. This concludes our event, and I see you back next year.